Carl Munson here on the Life Support Podcast with Dr. John Briffa for our second episode. John, it was great to catch up with you again last week, and I think it's been a great success launching this Life Support Podcast. What's your reflection on that?
My reflection is that I really enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed some of the comments, even though some of them have been a bit sharp. Privately, like my Aussie friend John saying, "Yeah, not bad, mate." Well, this is from a WhatsApp message, but if I was going to give you any advice, I'd say brush your hair.
Brush your hair, okay. All right. Did you or not?
No.
Anyway, you don't have to answer that. You don't have to answer that. Yes, evidently. We are talking about Scott Adams, mouth taping and seed oils today, hopefully. We may get distracted. We may go off on tangents, as is our way.
No.
Why Scott Adams then? I don't get it. You might have to explain to me. I do know who Scott Adams is. I understand the Dilbert franchise or comic strip, a cartoon.
Yeah,
tell us why you were sad to
see this week. I actually wrote a newsletter. I started a newsletter on LinkedIn, and it's called Working Well. And I thought I'd honour him because actually he's had quite an influence in my life, although you wouldn't know that necessarily. So he's most famous for writing the Dilbert cartoon. Okay. But he had a life in sort of corporate America before that in banking. He's also a trained hypnotherapist. These are all things that I think are very interesting. And then more latterly, he's been an author, I think, of considerable impact, as well as a sort of social political commentator. So he had a sort of show on YouTube and something called Locals called, I think, Coffee with Scott Adams is what it was called. Mm-hmm. Anyway, about 10 years ago, I read one of probably his most successful book, I think. I don't think it was his first book, but it was probably the most impactful. I've got it here, actually. I've got a real copy of it here. And it's called How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. Now, this book is all about sort of approaches to life that I think have enormous merit and potential value for people. I took a couple of things from the book, and I always think if you can just take a couple of things from a book, it's been worth the investment, quite frankly. One of them is something about sort of what he calls skill stacking. And it's the idea that as you're going through life, you don't need to be the best at anything, but if you're quite good or very good, hopefully, at a few things, you're in quite a rarefied area. Does that make sense? So if you're quite good, I don't know, public speaker, quite good writer, quite good doctor, whatever it is, and you put them all together, then, you know, that's good, right? Rather than trying to be the best at something. I mean, it's quite a good concept, I think, for people to grasp. But what I wrote about actually in the newsletter was something else that he talks about, which is goal setting and the potential pitfalls of that. Because the fact is, many people who set a goal, set a far off goal. I want to lose this amount of weight. I want to write a book. I want a promotion or whatever. That's all fine. But the point that he makes is it can be a bit demoralizing because, well, I don't think he mentions this in the book, but you may not achieve what your goal happens to be, which just feels maybe like disappointment or failure. But also along the way, you never really get any satisfaction until this big payoff at the end. And by the way, he doesn't mention this in the book, but that payoff, this is a topic for another day, is quite fleeting usually. You achieve this thing, orthodontic adaptation. But anyway, we'll leave that for a moment. Let's get back to the main topic. This idea that goals, these long-term goals, can be a little bit dispiriting. You're in this permanent state of not quite getting there. And he suggests being more sort of systems oriented. So you have a process that gets you towards your goal. And every time you apply that system, you are satisfied or you reward yourself in some way by saying, I did the right thing. It's just simply that concept. And actually, it's hugely useful because I've, written a few books myself. This is just an example. But I'm not thinking about completing the book necessarily. I may have that as a goal. But when I sit down to write, for example, I'm thinking about, I am going to write this bit. I'm going to research this bit or write this bit or whatever. I have a clear shorter term goal, a system that gets me towards a longer term goal. And every time I complete that, I feel good. It's the same with exercise. I exercise very regularly. I'm not trying to get anywhere particularly. I'm just trying to apply the system consistently, do you see? And you can apply this more or less to anything that you do in your life. And I think it is a very useful tool, a way of thinking about things and chunking things down that allows people to be continually motivated to do the thing that is right for them.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So quite the legacy then from just that one point of view, and I suspect he left many other great nuggets for people as well as entertaining people with the Dilbert ideas. I think in many ways he was like a savior or a supporter for people who were trapped in cubicles. That was part of his shtick, wasn't it?
That's the whole Dilbert thing. So he lived that life.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, he talked about it subsequently, and that was the spirit behind the Dilbert cartoon. You know, a lot of people living, in his estimation, this is probably true, lives of sort of quiet desperation in a cubicle in some, you know,
godforsaken corporation. Yes.
Yeah, and you know, I think it spoke to a lot of people. I mean, it was hugely popular. I think it was the most popular cartoon strip ever.
Yes,
I think I had that right, and it was, you know, very widely syndicated, very successful.
Well, I don't know a lot about him, and I can see that working in my life. What's that concept called that you just outlined there? That particular.
Well, I would describe it as, you know, systems over goals. Prioritize systems over just absolute goals.
Only yesterday, John, I am now the administrator of the company my wife and I have started. And I have this lifelong idea that I'm not very good with money. I'm not very good at admin. I'm terrible with accounts. And so the overarching long-term goal would be to be that guy. And what I found so helpful, and this is just only yesterday, I have broken it down into creating systems that I can get a daily pleasure from, rather than this whole focus on one day I might be that guy, whilst my inner dialogue is telling me, well, you probably never will be. So it really does work, and I think you can turn your attention yourself towards anything using this process.
That is a classic example of what Scott Adams would advocate, this systems over goals. And you may find, I mean, you may have taken the first step yesterday. You may have done something around the couch, thought, right, that's it. I'm there now. I am that person that is, you know, grasping the net a little bit. Something that, you know, this is all in a way relates also to mindset. You know, a lot of people have quite a fixed mindset about something or other. You know, like, I don't know, for years I've told myself I don't do languages. And then November last year, I was talking to my daughter Lily about this, that she's been reading books by someone called Matthew Syed, who's most famous, I think, for being a table tennis player, British champion, I think maybe Commonwealth champion, something like that. But he's written some very good books, both for adults, but also children. And one of them that she's reading, she's got two on the go. One's called You Are Awesome. The other one is called Dare to Be You.
Nice.
You Are Awesome is really about mindset and how you define yourself. And we were discussing this, and I think it's very important. And she said, do you think you have any fixed mindsets? And I said, yes, I do actually. And one of them being language and learning language. And I just said, right, that's it. I'm changing that. I am going to learn Portuguese. And I had some, and then I signed up to an app. And I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but over the last, I don't know, 6-8 weeks, my Portuguese, well, I'm not fluent, but it's got a lot better. And it all started a shift. There's been loads of examples like this from my life, and I'm not going to bore you with the details, but this is a classic example of identifying yourself as something different, something that you want to be, and then following the process. I was completely different with those lessons. You know, there's these daily lessons in the app. They're half an hour long. Actually took me about an hour to get through them, because I would stop when they ask you to say something in Portuguese and think about it before I would, you know, but I was very, very consistent with it. So I was following the process, and it led to me, you know, for example, last weekend, we were in the Serra Estrela, if you know that, a relatively high region.
Where it's snowing. Yeah, where it's snowing at the moment in Portugal.
Yeah, and we almost perished on the mountainside. But anyway, let's not get into that. But, you know, I'm with loads of Portuguese people, and I'm actually able to follow most of the conversations and say the odd thing myself, which is in stark contrast to how I have been historically. But
Yes.
there you go. It's a mindset shift.
Yeah, very good. And the takeaway possibly here, thanks to Scott Adams and this contribution, this topic today, is if you hear yourself saying something like something very objective and fixed, like I am this or that, you might want to challenge that. And here's a methodology for doing that on a daily and practical basis. Yeah,
except it's not objective, very subjective. It's just the opinion.
An idea just a judgment, a self-judgment.
I mean, in my view, I don't want to get philosophical. There is no true objectivity. Everything's filtered through our sort of beliefs and perspectives. And do you know what I mean? So that attitude that you have about yourself, the beliefs that you have about yourself, you know, was it Henry Ford that said something like, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's attributed to a number of people.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yes. Very, very good. Very good. So RIP Scott Adams then. Thank you for the legacy and a considerable one by the sound of it as well. And of course, let us know if you are putting any of the things into practice that we're talking about on the Life Support Podcast. It'd be lovely to hear about that, your progress or your blockages. And we can help you address those as well, kind of life's laxatives in a way to make things work well. Is that the name of your newsletter, John? Working Well? Did you say that?
It is, yeah, because I've got a book coming out later in the year called Working Well.
Right. Okay.
And I'm trying to do, you know, there's so much overwhelm out there. There's just too much information for people. And so I'm trying to do like a weekly newsletter with just one kind of point. Yes. So newsletter number 1, the point was systems over goals. That's it. I don't know what the second one will be, but it will be just one thing to bear in mind, because sometimes you read these articles and goes 13 ways to what?
Yes.
Like it's just too much, I think. So I haven't said that. I haven't stated that, but in my mind that's what it is. It'd be one thing.
Find John Briffa on LinkedIn and subscribe there, then, the Working Well newsletter. We do 3 things here every week. We publish on a Friday. This is episode 2. It's kind of episode 1, really, isn't it? Because last week was our catch-up and our pilot episode. So really, this is the first official episode 1, with 3 topics. The first we've looked at Scott Adams. The second is seed oils, our kind of nutritional take this week. These things always come up. There's always something to do with nutrition. We nearly talked about coffee. We might have talked about red wine. There's always something circulating with these perennial themes, isn't there? Is this good or bad for you? Generally speaking, most people there's not much good to say about seed oils, is there?
Not particularly. I don't think they need to be expunged from the diet, but if I can just go through, now that you brought it up, a bit of biochemistry. There's different facts. Sorry, it's boring, isn't it? But people have to know why. They're bad. Don't cook in sunflower or whatever. Well, fine. But explain it then. Explain it properly, and then we'll know. So there's different fats in the diet. I don't have time to go into it now, but things like what's called saturated fat you find in animal products, meat, dairy products, and whatever. Almost certainly doesn't cause heart disease, cardiovascular disease, or whatever. Okay, but we'll leave it to one side. Then you've got unsaturated fats. Okay, and this really relates to how much hydrogen is in them, because they're really a chain of carbon atoms with hydrogen stuffed onto them. And in saturated fat, they're fully saturated with hydrogen. You can't get any more on. But if you lose a bit of hydrogen, then they become unsaturated. Now, if they've lost a bit of hydrogen, they're monounsaturated, like olive oil. Broadly beneficial. I think it's overrated myself, but fine, have it in the diet if you want. A bit of olive oil, some avocado. And then you've got polyunsaturated of 2 main forms: omega-3, you've probably heard of, and omega-6, which you may not have heard of. Omega-3 is in stuff like oily fish mainly, so salmon, trout, mackerel, herring, sardine, that sort of thing. And omega-6 are basically seed oils, vegetable oils. So you find the most in a most concentrated form in sort of cooking oils, corn oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, that sort of stuff. But it's also in a lot of processed foods, fast foods, and the like. Okay. Now the important thing here is that omega-3s and omega-6 have roughly opposing actions. Okay. So, for example, omega-3 are sort of anti-inflammatory, which is critically important. I mentioned that on the pilot pod. inflammation seems to be a key driver
Mm.
of chronic disease. They also tend to encourage blood clotting. So we're talking about omega-3s. They encourage blood thinning, if you like, which is helpful. I also alluded to that in the first pod. They also tend to lower blood pressure overall. And these are all things that we would expect would reduce the risk of things like cardiovascular disease, as an example. Whereas omega-6 do the opposite of this. So they tend to, for example, be more inflammatory in nature. They tend to cause the blood to clot a bit more. They tend to raise blood pressure rather than lowering it. So you could imagine that these two have roughly opposing action, and a balance of these oils or fats in the diet may be important for health. And there is lots of what we call epidemiological evidence that suggests this, so that people, for example, that have a lot of omega-6 seed oils compared to omega-3 tend to be at increased risk of disease. That doesn't prove that they're causing the problem, but there's enough probably data from a biochemical perspective to conclude there's probably a causal link between too much omega-6 and having an increased risk of disease and probably death. Are you with me so far?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. What's the kind of what's the hack with this?
Well, the hack
start.
First of all, there's a bit more research that suggests that the ideal ratio between 6 and 3 will be something like 1 to 2 to 1.
Oh, okay.
And a typical Western diet is more like 15 to 20 to 1, because there's so many refined seed oils in our diet, because a lot of the diet is processed, and there's a lot of those oils in processed foods. So the hack is to, as much as possible, limit the amount of omega-6 in the diet and possibly bump up the amount of omega-3 so we get a better balance. And what that means is really, I would say, quite simply, is eating a diet based on natural unprocessed foods. Because if you're doing that, it's very difficult to overconsume omega-6. And if you happen to like, for example, oily fish like salmon, trout, mackerel, herring, sardine, those sorts of things, then include them in your diet. And that is probably a fairly decent nutritional approach to broadly improving your health. There's lots of other things you could do, but the topic is seed oils, omega-6, inflammation. That's what we're talking about. And if you want to quell that in the body, less processed foods, particularly seed oils, and more in the way of omega-3, if you like to do that. Not everyone likes oily fish. There are other ways of doing it through supplementation, but that's maybe a discussion for another day. But that's broadly the approach.
Very good, very good. And that's what we want to give, isn't it? Is the idea of people wandering around a supermarket studying labels to see if it's 3 or 6 in there and how much refined and processed. That becomes nightmarish, doesn't it? In as much as people stop doing it. But if you can give a broad guide, which is I think what we're about, which is to shift the emphasis and eat more of those oily fishes, for example, that's the sort of tactic we like here, I think, and that we want to share on this podcast.
I mean, ultimately, I mentioned this earlier, there's too much information out there generally, and people get very confused. I like things to be simple. Do you know what I mean? I don't like overcomplication. I don't like using long words unless they're properly explained. I don't, people, it's very easy to get overwhelmed. If you say, I'm going to base my diet on natural unprocessed foods, if that's it, that's what you go into a supermarket or some other shop thing, it's very difficult at that point to go badly wrong, I would say.
Yes, right, absolutely.
And don't let, there's this expression, don't let perfection get in the way of great.
One of my favorites, don't let the excellent spoil the good.
Yeah, that's it. So
okay, again,
if you like it.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your progress on that. If that's what you do, if you change your habits going into the supermarket, if you're shopping for more fresh things, and you're taking that approach, we'd love to hear from you and your hacks and tips on that to help other people make it easier in their lives as well. So seed oils, then we're adding to the general panning that seed oils seem to be getting there. But those are the reasons why from John and what you can do about it. Finally, then this week, because we want to keep it to 3 topics and we want to keep this brief, about 30 minutes a week, a quick update. Keen to hear your feedback and suggestions for other things that we might talk about. Finally, this came up, I think, as a little bit of a joke, mouth taping. I'm not even sure what it is. Is it connected to problems breathing at night? And because I also want to ask you if it is connected about the increasing prevalence, it seems, of, are they called CPAP machines, where people are wired up to some breathing? What's this all about? What's going on with all of this?
Well, it's a good question. Actually, my daughter mentioned this, funny enough, last week, because apparently there's this thing going around on social media. Not that I understand social media, but there's this thing going around. I don't know where she's seen it, that this is a thing, mouth taping. And it is indeed a thing, okay? And I would generally advocate it. And I'll just explain why. First of all, there's two ways of getting air into the lungs. One is through the mouth and one is through the nose. We're actually designed really to take air in through the nose and not the mouth, because there's a few advantages to breathing through the nose. Now, one is, when you breathe through the nose, you will filter and warm and moisten the air in a way you don't really do when you breathe through the mouth. And what that basically does is prepare the air for the lungs. Makes it better for the lungs, basically. But another thing it does is it tends to slow the breathing up a little bit, because you can tend to over breathe more, breathe a bit too much if you're breathing through the mouth. Now, that's a topic really for another day, but there's quite a lot of people who are chronically over breathing, sometimes called chronic hyperventilation. And this is a major cause of people's health issues, at least in some people, and anxiety. Again, it's a conversation for another day. But if you're breathing through the nose, you're less likely to do that. But then another thing is, behind the nose, you have nasal passages, kind of a cavity, which provides something called nitric oxide into the air. And that nitric oxide does a number of things. But for example, it helps dilate blood vessels. It helps dilate the airways. So it just improves the physiology overall. Now, at night, of course, you can't really control whether you're breathing through the nose or mouth. You're asleep, right? So if you tape your mouth shut at night, it forces you, obviously, to breathe through the nose. Now, if you have nasal congestion, you can't do that easily. That needs to be dealt with, obviously. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to tape your mouth shut. You're going to immediately feel a bit suffocated. Does that make sense? But that's, again, maybe a conversation for another day. But if you can breathe through your nose, taping your mouth shut at night will help ensure that. But there's another reason for doing it. And it's what you referred to a moment ago. So some people have breathing difficulty at night, either in the form of snoring, we're all familiar with that probably, or sleep apnea, which is what you were alluding to. That's where you actually stop breathing for seconds at a time, repeatedly through the night. And that's what those machines that you refer to, CPAP, continuous positive airways pressure. And they basically force air through the nose to push air into the lungs so that you're breathing a bit better. Now, a lot of people don't tolerate these machines, but if they have sleep apnea and they do tolerate them, it is often transformative for those people, because most people with sleep apnea wake up in the morning feeling like they haven't really slept. They're kind of a bit dead on their feet a bit. And once they breathe a bit better through the night, with this device, they often feel a lot better very quickly. But anyway, how can we prevent that? Well, one of the problems with snoring and sleep apnea is lying on your back with your mouth open, because there's a risk when you do that the tongue and other structures, like the back of the roof of the mouth, sort of fall back a bit and then block the airway. This isn't always the cause of sleep apnea, but it is the most common, I think. Now, if you imagine the anatomy for a moment, if you're lying on your back with your mouth open, there's more of a tendency for gravity to pull your tongue and other structures down to block your airway. With your mouth closed, that's less likely to happen. Okay, and it's simply because you've sort of clamped the tongue a bit more effectively to the roof of the mouth. Is this making some sense?
Yeah,
so that's another reason why mouth tape, also keeping off your back, can be helpful, and there's certain devices that can help with that. But that is often helpful. And there is, to my knowledge, one study where they looked at people with relatively mild sleep apnea. But for my money, any sleep apnea is not really mild. But anyway, relatively mild sleep apnea. And they found that just mouth taping, if I remember rightly from the study, this is from memory from 2 or 3 years ago, basically halved the number of sleep apnea episodes. So there is legitimacy to this. And even if you don't, for example, have any disturbance in your your breathing through the night, you might consider doing it anyway if it suits you, because again, it will force you to breathe through your nose. By the way, one of the signs I suggest people look out for to see whether or not perhaps they are breathing through their mouth or their nose through the night is whether they wake up at some point in the night or in the morning with a very dry mouth. Most people think this is thirst. It usually is not thirst actually that's driving that. It is mouth breathing through the night. And if you do that, having the mouth closed may well just improve your physiology through the night and have you feel more refreshed in the morning, even without snoring and sleep apnea.
This is so brilliantly coincidental. It's like you're Meta and you've been listening to what's been going on in the Munson household with this conversation about snoring and then what goes on at night. I think in the last 48 hours, Mrs. Emma said to me, you need to sleep on your side now, anticipating the noise that's going to emanate quite soon from me. Mouth taping now.
That's a classic marital thing, by the way, because
you know,
it's kind of like an elbow, sharp elbow into the rib cage or the solar plexus.
Yeah, that's right. You wake up. What?
Yeah. It's always all right. Go on.
If you get the elbow in the back or the ribs because you're on your back and about to snore, and you've got your mouth taped up, it's like I would imagine waking up and think I'm being kidnapped, right? I'm being assaulted, and my mouth has been taped. That must take some getting used to. How does this work, John? Are there like sort of proprietary brands? You don't use.
First of all, you've reminded me of something. There is a product out there for this called hostage tape.
No,
I don't know if that's the best. There is. I don't know if it's the best branding, but I'm just telling you. Okay.
Right. Okay.
So, first of all, I am going to answer your question, but I just want to say something else as well, which is keeping off your back is important, and there are ways of doing that. I think I alluded to them earlier, but basically, for example, you can, get a T-shirt, sew a ball into a pocket in the back, and wear that.
Well, with all the other things I've got going on in the bedroom.
No, but hang on. A lot of people would say they'd look at it. Oh, by the way, there's other devices that can keep your mouth shut, which I'll tell you about in a moment. Now, I can see where you're going with this, because you're probably thinking, well, it's not very sexy, is it? Let me just tell you, snoring is not sexy.
Snoring. No, right. Yes.
Okay, so let me just get that out there. Okay, and often it's a massive irritation for the person having to endure it, because the irony is the person making all the racket is fast asleep.
They are oblivious, aren't they? My dad used to snore. Yeah. And I remember being on tour. Yeah, we went to America and we shared rooms, twin rooms in America, and his snoring. I was so angry, incendiarily angry, if that's the right word. I was mad as hell, and I went and got myself some earplugs. So it was bringing up all my kind of childhood resentment all in one episode. I know exactly what you mean to be on the receiving end of that, and I'd hate to think that I would do that to anyone who's in bed with me. I mean, my wife, basically, because she's the only one that does happen with. I will say for the record here. But yeah, you wanted to say more on mouth taping or sewing tennis balls into the back of your T-shirt?
Well, yeah, I mean, for example, I noticed on Amazon that you can get like essentially what are tiny little rucksacks that have a ball in the back.
Right.
So then you don't have to sew anything into the back of a T-shirt. You can just, whatever you're wearing.
For this purpose?
Just for this purpose, yeah.
Right. Did you say getting protective gear? Right, okay. Right. I'm just thinking, should we invite pictures of people with their special tennis ball rucksack? No, okay, please don't send us those. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
But while we were talking, I remembered something else. There are what are called anti-snoring chin straps. Basically, neoprene. Yeah, all right. Well, let me finish, and then you can make a judgment.
Sorry, yeah, I'm already there. Okay.
So yeah, as usual, you're ahead of me. But basically, they're neoprene straps that go under the chin, over the top of the head. Most of them are they have a Velcro thing so that you can adjust the size. They've got holes cut out for the ears, usually. And these will hold your mouth shut if you don't like the taping idea, for example. Now, I know it's mad, but they're cheap. They're £10, €12. $15, whatever it is. You know, they're not expensive, and they can really help people.
Save a marriage.
More. Yes, they can. I mean, that's probably slightly overstating it, but it's not far from the truth, because, you know, having worked with people over the years, it is a major cause of irritation and a bone of contention in couples. It's very common. This is common. This is not like, oh, this is like 3% of people. No, it's a very significant minority of people that have this issue. And it is often gets to the state where people are now having to kind of separate at the end of the evening and go into separate beds.
Exactly. That's another, you know, because I was thinking of spooning. I was thinking all sorts of things were coming to mind. And sorry if I was giggling a little bit too much and being unprofessional there. But this does, you know, like so many of our conversations, it does spawn other ideas. We do need to talk about sleep, don't we? We do need to talk about, you know, sleeping in separate bedrooms, what's going on in the relationship, the resentment that could come up that's triggered by the snoring. There's so much in this. And I was also thinking my wife and my missus is in for such a treat this weekend. If I get one of those neoprene straps, tape up my mouth, get the rucksack with the tennis ball, as I enter the room, and I'm going to say, John said this is going to be good for our marriage. I mean, it's a winner, isn't it?
Well, actually, you may be onto a winner there, because I've noticed something about relationships generally in couples.
Right.
Usually, a person in a relationship doesn't really listen to their partner. I mean, this is quite common.
Yeah.
In fact, you're the person least likely, maybe in some respects, to have some influence over your partner. This is really common. I remember mentioning that I was in Germany. Well, this is an anecdote. I was in Germany giving a talk, and someone asked me about bedroom temperatures. And I said, well, they say this, but blah, blah, blah. And he goes, I knew I was right. I'm going to tell my wife. I said, don't drag me into your marital stuff, right? Don't mention my name. Don't mention this course. Don't mention any of that. I'm joking, of course. And then he said something in German and then translated it swiftly into English, which was, and it's in the Bible somewhere, not that I'm religious, the prophet has no value in his own land. I'll paraphrase that. But that's
absolutely.
And this is probably true. But of course, if you say it's come from someone else, your other half may be perfectly accepting of that all of a sudden. Do you see what I mean? But let me just tell you,
work. I can say that. Yeah. If you want something for the back of your next
back, not in your mouth. Okay.
Okay. That's a different night.
Yeah,
okay. Okay. And if you want a quote for the back of your book, this does happen in our house. I'll say, John, I remember John telling me this, and Louisa, my wife, will say, yeah, he's so wise, or that's so good, or what was it, that thing John told you? So, you know, there you go. You're very welcome. For the next book jacket there, John, as quoted by Mrs. M. Don't forget to subscribe to John's new newsletter on LinkedIn, Working Well, and we'll be back next week. I really enjoyed this. I could talk so much more, but I think it's right. Yeah, we picked 3 topics and stick to about half an hour, and we'll be back again to do it next week.
Go well. Have a good week, everyone.